Hi, I'm AJ Titter, author of Magic and Myth. In this first video, I'll be reading the first scene from my free short story, Torched Feathers. And then afterwards, I will be sharing some behind the scenes information as well. So let's get started. A ring of children hemmed Fledgling and Kitten in, all eyes focused on the two girls. Even more silent were the stately trees that formed a second, larger circle. Fledgling held up the walnut-sized globe Kitten offered, inspecting the prize for their game. A sunbeam caught the green glass, casting an envious pallor onto the small girl's face. "Come on, Fledgling, you know you want it. No one else has a green one yet," Kitten said. Called marbles by the traders, the girl thought marble was a better name. They were all different colors and perfectly round. She preferred to look inside at the bubbles frozen in time. She handed the green ball back to her friend. "I've been practicing." Mackerel, a girl a year older and twice their height, snorted. "Your marble never lands in the bird's nest. That green one is mine." Her bold statement gave courage to the other children standing around them, each one claiming the marble would be theirs. Fledgling glanced around. "Mackerel's right," she thought as she hung her head. "I've never passed the first challenge." Kitten moved closer. "Don't listen to them. Show them you're the next leader of the Sky Clan." Kitten then took a step back. Whistling, she quieted the crowd. "Fledgling, tell them the rules." Fledgling's head snapped up, her eyes wide as she stared at Kitten. In return, Kitten smiled encouragingly. Fledgling swallowed and wiped her hands on her hide pants. "Your marble must land in the bird's nest." Kitten's hand settled on her shoulder. Fledgling looked at the crowd of children. Fingerlings, fledglings, and kittens stared back. Kitten squeezed her shoulder. "If you pass the first challenge, you'll roll your marble into the turtle shell." She spoke louder. "The last challenge is to run from one end of the clearing and back again, while keeping your marble safely in the seashell." Kitten handed a reed basket to Fledgling. Fledgling removed the bird's nest first. She climbed the tree, attaching the bird's nest to the limb she used for practice. Next, she picked up the hollow box turtle shell, carrying it to the edge of the clearing. Fledgling dug a hole and placed the shell inside, its lip even with the dirt. The breeze blew across the plain in front of her, setting the tall grasses and flowers dancing. For a moment, she wondered about the people who lived on the other side. The grandfather said the visiting traders lived in villages out in the open, houses made of wood and stone, so close that not even grass grew between them. One man, called a king, ruled them, but he didn't live with them. He had a giant stone building even further across the land. Fledgling would trust their word. She never wanted to leave the safety of the forest. After returning to the clearing, Fledgling signaled everyone to line up. She took a spot in the middle. Being first or last was too much pressure. For the smaller children, the bird's nest was the most difficult. The hole was only large enough for a finch, and the limb it hung from was twice as high as the tallest child. Mackerel took the first shot. 13 pairs of little eyes stared as her clear marble soared up into the leaves of the tree and fit through the nest opening. She climbed the tree, retrieved her marble from the nest, then strode to the back of the line with a smug smile. "I want that marble. It will be mine," Fledgling repeated like a mantra as the line moved forward. Her friend stepped up to the twig they had placed on the ground. Fledgling held her breath as the clay marble sailed through the air, smacked a leaf, and landed in the nest. Her friend squealed before climbing the tree to fetch her marble. "Okay, I can do this," Fledgling thought as she took a deep breath. "Don't think about the others. Just throw it like I practiced." "Come on, Fledgling, shoot already," her friend called from the back of the line. She took one more deep breath, then tossed her glass marble with the big bubble in the center. She leaned forward as it got lost in the leaves. "Oh no, oh no, oh no! It's too high." The marble swatted the leaves. The children looked at each other. It hadn't come down. Fledgling's head hung as she shuffled toward the other losers. "Lost. My precious marble is gone." She doubted even the animals would be able to find it. Fledgling flopped down in front of a younger fingerling. The girl leaned forward and patted Fledgling's back. Fledgling twirled a dried pine needle between her fingers as she tried to ignore the look of satisfaction on Mackerel's face. "Fledgling, Fledgling," the boy kitten, whose turn was after hers, called. "I found your marble. It was in the nest." Mackerel stepped out of line. She cheated. She had to. Fledgling kept her head down as she walked toward the boy and her marble, but Mackerel's feet were there, blocking her path. Fledgling changed course, but again the girl blocked her. "I just want my marble, Mackerel," Fledgling mumbled. Kitten stepped forward. Mackerel glared at Kitten, stopping her from coming to Fledgling's aid. Pressure built behind Fledgling's eyes. "Why does she always pick on me?" "I don't know if cheaters should be allowed marbles," Mackerel said as she fixed her eyes on Fledgling. Fledgling jerked her head up, her tears receding. "That's my marble. You can't take it." "Just because you're the next Canna doesn't mean you can cheat and get away with it." Mackerel flipped her hair over her shoulder before crossing her arms. "I didn't cheat." The rebuttal came out low, but Fledgling held Mackerel's gaze. The two stared in silence. Fledgling dropped her eyes first. "No way am I letting her decide my fate." Fledgling lifted her head and looked over her shoulder at Kitten. "Assemble the spirits. I'll be judged by a council." Kitten smiled at Fledgling's quick thinking before she went to work organizing her friend's trial. "As the next Emmis, I'll represent the Earth Clan." Kitten scanned the children. "Tahani, you'll represent the Sky Clan, and Kita, you'll represent Sea." "Hey," Mackerel called out. "I'm the eldest girl from the Sea Clan." "The council must be neutral," Kitten replied. "Well, what about you, Kitten?" Mackerel said as she stepped toward the younger girl with her finger pointed. "You're her best friend." "An Emmis can make decisions separate from her attachments," Kitten repeated words her mother told her often. Mackerel huffed but took a seat with the rest of the children. After collecting Fledgling's marble, Kitten joined the other judges under the tree. Fledgling took a seat to the side. She pretended to itch her scalp, moving her hair to block her face from the crowd. "Spirits of the earth and sky," Kitten began. "We ask that any who witnessed Fledgling's marble come forward." The tree behind them rustled. A furry gray chin palm crawled to the lowest branch. He wrapped his pink hairless tail around the branch and hung upside down. Kitten and the other judges turned to address him. "Thank you for responding," Kitten said with a nod. The chin palm's long nose twitched as he lifted his head to Kitten. "Please, tell us what you saw," Kitten continued. The chin palm grunted. "He says he didn't do it," Kitten interpreted for those children who didn't have the gift of understanding the animals. Fledgling stared at him, mouth agape. "Did Mackerel set me up?" "Did someone ask you to drop the marble into the nest?" Kitten asked. The chin palm replied with a sneeze-like sound. His overly large, round ears flicked back while his fur rippled. "He said no." "Then why?" The chin palm turned his attention to Fledgling, making eye contact. Low grunts and chew-chews explained his reason. "He hoped by putting the marble in the nest, Fledgling would stop practicing and disturbing him while he slept," Kitten interpreted. Fledgling couldn't help but smile. "I'm sorry I disturbed your sleep." "That's settled then," Kitten said as she stood. "Fledgling didn't cheat." "Oh, what do we have here?" Fledgling's favorite brother said as he emerged from the woods to join them. He stood behind the group of children seated facing the tree. "Fingerlings, kittens, and fledglings holding council?" He ruffled the hair of the children closest to him. "Your mothers would be pleased. However, you're wanted in the meeting lodge." The brother helped the younger children up, sending them all marching back toward the village. Kitten handed Fledgling's marble back to her. Expecting they would return together, Kitten grabbed Fledgling's hand. But Fledgling hung back to speak with the brother. He smiled as he walked toward Fledgling. Although they had no blood relation, she held a special place in his heart. "Your practicing paid off, huh?" Fledgling stared at the marble resting in her palm and shook her head. The man plucked the marble up, rolled it around his fingers, then placed it in his own palm to offer it back to her. When Fledgling grabbed for the marble, he closed his hand and pulled it back. They both grinned. "I'll be quicker next time," Fledgling said. "Challenge accepted," Irma said with a wink. He held out the marble again. She put her hand out, ready to steal it. Focusing on his hand, she waited for tiny signs he was about to close it. To gauge his reaction, Fledgling feinted with her hand. Then she brought her other palm up beneath his and smacked his hand from underneath. The marble popped up, and Fledgling plucked it from the air. "I think that was cheating," Irma said. "This game doesn't have rules." He tousled her hair. "Neither does life." Irma squatted next to her and pulled his long hair over his shoulder so the sea beads woven in his hair clinked. Looping her hands around his neck, Fledgling climbed on his back, and as they strode toward the village, she laid her head on his bare skin and breathed in his scent. The faint saltiness conjured images of the seabed. Even so, Fledgling couldn't stop thinking about Mackerel and how she treated her in front of the others. "What happens if the clans don't respect Canna?" Irmis turned his head. "Never happens." Fledgling sighed. "Great, I'll be the first." When they reached the meeting lodge, he put her down so they could walk in together. The 3 clan leaders, Nain, Canna, and Emmis, sat on the short raised platform at the front. She and Irmis kept to the back of the lodge, hoping to go unnoticed. "Nice of you to join us, brother," Nain said with a reprimanding eye. Irmis merely smiled at the Sea Clan leader as he took a seat on the ground. Fledgling sat in his lap. She looked up at her mother, expecting a stare of her own, but Canna ignored her. Once her mother had the feather cape about her shoulders, she was no longer Fledgling's mother. She was the leader of the Sky Clan. Her mother said each feather held the wisdom of a previous Canna. "And one day it will be mine," Fledgling thought. "Maybe it gives us power. Then I'll be able to stand up for myself." Fledgling shifted her focus to Emmis, the Earth Clan leader, and smiled. "Kitten will have to wear that stinky Lorcus skin over her face." "Halgrond continues to expand their borders," Emmis said to the people. "They ask to cut our timber." A murmur went through the crowd. A young brother from the Sea Clan spoke up. "What are they offering in return? What do they need it for?" Canna set her eyes on him. "They are building an outpost on the edge of our wood. What is our timber worth?" A sister from the Sky Clan rose. "It is not our timber to give. What of the birds who nest in them? Of the insects who eat their sap?" A sister of the Earth Clan called out, "What is the purpose of this outpost?" Nain cleared her throat. "It would protect their border, but it would also serve as a trading spot." Another murmur went through the lodge. "But trade is good, right?" Fledgling whispered. "It is, but it has a cost." Of course there's a cost, Fledgling thought. You must give something to get something. "And what will stop them from seizing our forest and forcing us under their rule?" the Earth Clan sister asked. A brother from the Earth Clan jumped up. "Survival requires compromise. Counting the birds and beasts, we outnumber them. But are you willing to forfeit their lives, to continue living on land we do not own?" Fledgling looked to her mother, wondering what she was thinking, but it was hard to guess. She always looked thoughtful, taking in each opinion. Her mother had once explained the advantage of the Sky Clan was in seeing a larger picture. As birds soared in the sky and could see in all directions for miles, the people of the Sky Clan remembered the past and could recognize the possibility of the future. Across the room, 2 sisters from the Sky Clan helped a grandmother stand and face the crowd. Her hair and the white sea beads woven therein were almost the same color. Both shone bright against her bronzed skin from years of labor on the beach. "One cannot stop a wave from crashing," the grandmother said. "You can only move out of its way, or let it wash over you." The clan sat in silence, taking in the grandmother's words. "Take the rest of the day to talk with the spirits," Canna addressed the clans. "In the morning, we will make our decision." With the council finished, Fledgling crawled out of Irma's lap. She wove her way between the crowd, eager to reach her mother before she removed the feather cape. Nain had already removed the otunk skins from around her shoulders when Fledgling climbed the short platform. Without their mantles, the women were like any other clan member in their hide tunic and leggings. "I'm sorry I was last," Fledgling said as she hugged her mother's legs. Her mother squatted. "If Canna is late, what example does that set?" Fledgling stroked the feathers hanging over her mother's arm. "Now," her mother smiled, "we have to commune with the spirits. Return to the wigwag and prepare." After her mother released her, Fledgling followed the rest of the clansmen filing out of the meeting lodge. She ran between the wigwags, stopping before their own bark-covered dwelling to steady her breathing before entering. Preparing a communing fire required the correct heart and mindset, so she placed her marble in the ill-made reed basket she had crafted earlier in the summer, before coaxing the fire beetle from his nest toward the small pile of twigs. "I ask for your fire, my friend," Fledgling said to the beetle. The beetle clicked at her. He stood with his rear facing the twigs, and there was a pop as the two streams of liquid issued from his rump crossed. Then the twigs smoked. Fledgling blew on them until a flame started. She thanked the beetle, gave him a dandelion head as a treat, and helped him back to his nest. Then she lifted the lid on her mother's herb basket and fed the fire dried wormwood and tobacco leaves. "That's enough, Fledgling," her mother said as she bent down through the opening of their wigwag. She sat cross-legged opposite her daughter, closed her eyes, and hummed. Fledgling put the herbs away, then copied her mother, trying to determine when she should add her own humming. She opened one eye to see if any spirits had joined them. "Keep your eyes closed," her mother said without opening her own. How does she know? Fledgling thought as she squeezed her eyes tight. When her mother hummed again, Fledgling added her own tune. Soon she wasn't even aware of her mother's presence. The song coming from her heart gripped her mind. Fledgling felt as if she were soaring high above the forest, and in the blackness behind her eyes, she could make out shades of trees and hills. The landscape drew nearer. She could make out the wigwags tucked amongst the trees. Even closer now, there was a door into a wigwag. As she saw herself sitting, she felt the presence enter. Their humming ceased. They opened their eyes and bowed their heads toward the crane and chop that had entered their home. The birds cocked their heads, watching and waiting. "We seek your wisdom, spirits of the sky. We acknowledge you observe great distances, while we can only see a few steps in front of us. Tell us, what did you observe as you soared above the forest?" Canna asked the visitors. The crane raised his head to the roof of the wigwag and opened his beak, letting out a medium-pitched cry, followed by one of the same length but higher. He sang for a short while. Being born with the gift meant that Canna and Fledgling didn't hear a song. Instead, they heard words. The birds spoke to them as if it were a person. When the crane had said his piece, the trough loudly called "Chia" for several minutes. The words they shared made Fledgling's thoughts race. Images of an unstoppable horde of men descending on the forest caused her stomach to harden. "Mother, will they swallow us, just like the sister from the Earth Clan said?" "We can negotiate," Canna replied. "Why do you think they ask us for our timber instead of taking it?" Fledgling thought. "There aren't many of us, maybe 100. Halgron must have enough soldiers to force us." As the birds picked at their feathers, she hoped they might give her a clue. Canna inclined her head toward the birds. "Are there more people or animals in the world, Fledgling?" "They're scared because the animals are our allies," Fledgling said. So that's the first scene from the short story, Torched Feathers. Probably the most difficult part I had in writing this was the fact that I didn't want the leaders of the clan to have their own personal name, so they only go by the title, so like Canna, Emis, Nain, and therefore the children that are next in line to take over, they don't have personal names either. So therefore, like Fledgling and Kitten, they're only called by the title of what every child from the clan is called. I went through a couple different iterations of how to make that clear in the story, one of which was basically coming out and blatantly saying it, which I didn't like at all. So I just kind of left it as kind of an inference on the reader's part, and I'm hoping that that came across clear. Um, you can probably tell that I'm not great with coming up with fantasy creatures. So you have the chin palm, which in both name and um, looks or description is a mix between a chinchilla and a possum, and like the otunk, that is a cross between a skunk and an otter. There was something that I came up with for the background of this society. It is a matriarchal society. So, in that sense, I kind of had envisioned that they're one big family. It's the mothers who raise the children, but it's not actually known, probably most of the time, who the father of the child is. What I kind of envisioned in the background story, which obviously doesn't make it into this story at all, but is that there's only a few nights a year that couples actually come together to procreate, and the rest of the time they live separately in their own wigwags, other than like the mothers or the children live with the mothers. And then also wanting it to be more of like a big family. That's why, especially for the children, they call everyone by the relation. So it's grandmother and it's grandfather or brother and sister. They wouldn't necessarily call people by their personal name. So that was just kind of a background thing that I came up with that, again, doesn't really make it into the story. But that's kind of where I went with the background for this society. Irmis and Fledgling's relationship. So at one point I had thought to have Irmis be Fledgling's father, and whether she and he actually knew that was up for debate. I did end up disregarding that. And in fact, now I'm kind of toying with the possibility that in the novel that this is a prequel to, Tarnished Relics, that maybe Irmis will actually be the father for one or a couple of Fledgling's children. Probably my favorite line from this whole short story is the one from the grandmother, about one cannot stop a wave from crashing. You can either move out of its way or let it wash over you. My editor actually wanted to cut that. I believe it was something about it didn't make sense. It had no purpose in the story. But I couldn't let it go, even if it doesn't make any sense. So you can be the judge of that. I like the line. And then as far as the animal speakers, I wanted to show some like mundane ways that their gift would allow them to use the animals, that other peoples, like the traders from Halgrond, they wouldn't have access to. So like specifically in this scene, we have Fledgling using the fire beetle to start the fire for them. Now someone from Halgrond, the traders who don't have this ability, they're going to have to use like flint and steel. They're going to have to use tools. Versus the animal speakers, they can rely on the animals to actually help them do things. And then the last thing I'll go over for this scene is how to show the animals speaking in the short story. I had at one point toyed with actually like sharing what the animals were saying, like in human speech. But ultimately I went with where you just hear how, like, the sounds the animals make. Since as the reader, we don't have the gift to actually hear what the animals are saying, to us it would just sound like the dog is barking or the bird is singing. But the gift that they have actually allows them to understand that speech. So it's not so much that the animals are speaking in a human language as it is that the people, their gift, allows them to understand that speech. So that's why I went with that. So that's all I have for this scene. If you do have questions that you'd like me to answer, please feel free to DM me or go to my website at ajtitter.com, and you can use the contact form and send me an email. If you can't wait for the next video to come out and you want to find out what happens in this short story, go to my webpage at ajtitter.com and you can download it for free. So that's really all I have. So thank you for joining me on this. And until the next time, stay magical.